reference and to share on our website, because if you have some questions, we're sure others in the community also have questions. So Ask Me Anything About Social Enterprise, which we fondly refer to as AMAASE, is a new collaboration between the organizations represented by our panelists today, namely the Trico Charitable Foundation, ABC'd, and Social Enterprise Fund, and the Haskayne School of Business. We are thrilled you are joining us here today. This series of sessions is something new that the community is interested in, and to see how we can help. So we need your support, and your questions will make this and these kinds of events a success. As a reminder, though the panel represents many, many years of experience with social enterprise and within the ecosystem, we'd like to remind you that this is not legal advice. And without further ado, allow me to introduce today's panelists. Firstly, we have Jane Bisbee, the Executive Director of the Social Enterprise Fund. The Social Enterprise Fund invests in Alberta's social enterprises and social entrepreneurs, providing the patient and imaginative capital they need to successfully accomplish important public benefit missions. Next, we have Brittni Kerluke, Manager of Capacity Building at the Trico Charitable Foundation, as well as Dan Overall from the Trico Charitable Foundation. So this foundation seeks to close gaps in society by provoking innovation and building capacity in social entrepreneurship. Last but not least, we have Christine Spottiswood from ABC, which is Alberta Social Economy Ecosystem Development. ABC is a collaborative of social enterprise and social finance leaders seeking to develop a strong social economic ecosystem in Alberta. Since we're doing an Ask Me Anything session, does anyone in the audience that submitted a question already that would like to come on, unmute, and share your question or raise your hand so that we can call on you and answer those right away? Tim, please.
I don't actually have my question with me, but I guess I can just go off my memory of it. Hi everyone, thank you so much panelists for coming here and hosting this. I've been involved in the social enterprise space for a long time and mostly on my own ventures, but now I'm making a transition where I'm joining an established organization to really help them thrive using a lot of the tools that I learned from making mistakes on my own social enterprises. And I'm curious what your advice for me is in that kind of a situation, moving from doing your own thing and just all those mistakes you make, but also how to transition that momentum and that energy into an established organization.
Shall I go first?
Yes, please, Jane.
So I would think that there must be something behind why you made that switch and what you thought you could bring to the table for them. So that would be, to me, the first clue I'd look for to think. So what did you think you could bring to them?
I think more specific metrics specifically for them as an organization. So the organization is Grow Calgary, long legacy of urban food production and trying to solve food sustainability problems. And my background is in technology and accounting, and to some extent sociolinguistic research, but it pulls together a couple of different things. So those are some of the kind of core skills I bring to them, and trying to kind of help their organization develop better systems.
So it was about systems and technology, or was it about the accounting systems, which are, I mean, I'm always really happy to hear when a social enterprise has actually got some accounting skill in the room. That's huge.
Yeah, the two are very linked, especially with I feel like social enterprise is questioning the nature of how impact connects to accounting and technology. That's why I feel like it's a bit of both for this organization.
Yeah, any of those kinds of relationships, when you go into something, it's a matter, I think, of first of listening, remembering why they asked you to come there, And then hopefully they're willing to listen to the suggestions you make once you've had a chance to watch from the inside what's going on. Making assumptions you know all about what the answer is supposed to be before you've had a chance to look around the room. I've got a personal story connected to that. When I was given this job, one of the things they asked for during the interview was a 6-month business plan of what I was going to do to change the social enterprise fund. And my answer, which may have been a career-ending move in the interview session, was to say, no, I'm not going to do that. That would be me assuming I know all about you. And that from the outside, how can I do that? I will give you one in 3 months' time after I've had a chance. And then I did that. But I think you really have to observe what's there and then marry that with the skills that they brought you in for and go from there.
I think in line with what Jane's saying too is, working as a solo entrepreneur and then going into an organization, it's a different culture that you're entering. And so one of the things that we at Trico talk a lot about is camaraderie, and really how do you see other people's perspectives, and how do you understand that even though something maybe is opposing to how you see it, really getting down to, well, why do they see it that way, and seeing it as a start of a conversation. And so really understanding sort of this place you play in regards to stakeholders, even within your organization, and industry experience, things like that coming into play. So I think all of those pieces are really core, no matter sort of what type of organization that you're doing or joining.
And just to build on both Jane and Brittany's points, the key is dialogue and not assumptions in a relationship. So setting the ground rules of how we want this relationship to prosper is absolutely crucial. And another thing we try to do with our Trico materials is, whenever possible, shorten feed loops. So let's not wait 3 months to see whether this relationship is working. Let's have an ongoing kind of dialogue to make sure everybody is getting out of it what they're hoping to get.
Thank you. That's a lot of good advice. Thank you.
Any follow-up questions, Tim?
Let me see what other things come up as the conversation ensues. I'm sure there will be.
Thank you. Okay, back to the audience.
Everybody's gone dark.
I know we can't see faces. Jim is setting a good example.
We're going to have a really short session if nobody's got any questions. Nope. There's someone.
Ronnie.
Hi there. Sorry, I was hoping to just lurk and piggyback on other people's questions, but one of the challenges is that in terms of organizational structure, fee for service is a pretty common way of kind of putting a toe in social enterprise, and I'm just wondering about making that leap from a fee for service model, so taking something we already do well for government contract ways, and then kind of just offering that for other folks, how we can use that knowledge and organizational structure to actually help us take a few extra steps into towards a social enterprise.
Can I ask a question or two? So I'm going to ask you some questions that'll help me understand.
Well, that'll fuel my lurking tendencies even more, but okay.
Yeah. So you obviously, you do fee for service now, you do work on contract with government, right?
That's right.
Right, so they're one of your customers. And
yes.
So are you thinking you have other potential customers outside of government that would buy your service the same way government is buying your service as a customer?
Yes, or that we could attract other governments, not Alberta governments, but other provinces' governments to buy the service.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're expanding your revenue stream, right? So how take me back to your question then. If you have, what you're identifying are new customers and new revenue streams, that makes you social entrepreneur already. You're being paid because you have a customer, you're getting revenue streams, you're selling product or service for which somebody's paying money. So you're already a social enterprise. What your question seems to me to really be about is, we've identified new customers, we want to expand our customer base. Hurrah. I don't think that has much to do with your structure per se, unless you identify customers who aren't going to deal with your organization the same way. I mean, until you're making so much money that you attract the attention of CRA because your profits are so high, and you're not investing them back into the work that you're doing, then knock yourself out. To me, that's the perfect sort of situation to be. I mean, social entrepreneurship, to me, the best part of it is that you take the skills of the business world, everything they teach everybody over in the Haskell in the MBA classes, and you apply that to the business of doing social good. And it's essentially teaching all those nonprofits the business handshakes that they teach the MBA students, so that you have the tricks and the skills too that we automatically teach in a commerce school or in a business school.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Jane?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been contemplating a little bit about is our board. So our current board is formulated to support the current kind of the current work that we're doing, but we're not selected necessarily for their business acumen or those sorts of pieces. They're supporting our social purpose. Yeah. So if we were to take a few steps toward something that we anticipate, let's say, could be an extra $1 million a year coming into the organization.
Great.
Well, I mean, we're expensive services, right?
Yeah.
So let's say we could do that. Does it make sense, or is it advisable to form a board or a subcommittee of the board, maybe made up of different members that have that business or entrepreneurial focus? Or is this really something that, both from a CRA perspective, and that we should be doing with the board that we've now assembled, who's a great board, but we're assembled for a slightly different purpose?
Yeah, board recruitment is really important, and it can be a challenging thing. So you're running a business now. I always think it's probably good to have some business minds in the room, as long as they understand that they should forget all their business acumen when they get there, which is a strange thing that I have come across. You have to be able to manage the operation in the speed of business, right? And so the board has to be comfortable that the staff is able to do that, and the relationship has to be right. But it would help if there are people in the room who understand all the skills of running a good business.
And so, just to clarify, better to enhance the current board than to have a specialized social enterprise board or foundation board or something.
The board of the organization has to have the best interests and the understanding of the organization for which they're responsible. And so if this business, if expanding your customer base of what you're already doing, I would think you wouldn't want a separate group over there, that the people who have the fiduciary responsibility for the organization, so they don't know what they're doing, and they could be at cross purposes. Now, it can be really challenging. I've seen boards broken apart because there's, you end up with two camps in the room sometimes. The people who are saying, no, but the mission is, and the other people saying, yeah, but we can make money. And the creep from the mission, you have to be really strong as a board and as an organization to hold that whole piece and not have it spin apart. I mean, if there's a crack in the organization, this kind of thing can split it open really carefully. So you're right to think about, who do we need at the table that understands this? And are we all marching in the same direction? I'm talking too much. The other guys should come into this. Brittni, you've had experience with
Yeah, so I won't give you advice of what route is best for you, because it's just, we don't give direct advice like that. But I will sort of talk about, one of the things that we talk to organizations a lot is around, I already talked about stakeholders, but one of the pieces to that is really thinking about what your needs are and what voices you need at the table. So do you feel like you're lacking a certain type of experience that isn't on your board, and what makes sense for you to, how to structure that? We talk a lot about friendly wise skeptics, and we talk about industry specific knowledge. So if I was starting up a cafe, I don't want to talk to Brittni from Trico Foundation because she hasn't started up a cafe. I want to talk to Joe, who has run 6 cafes. He has that experience. And so we call them friendly wise skeptics because they're friendly. You want someone that you can have honest conversations with and aren't just going to beat down your idea. They're wise. They have that industry experience, but they're also skeptical. So they're going to call you on some of those maybe assumptions and pieces that you are maybe not fully conceptualizing, things that maybe you've put your feet into and you're stuck on your ground, right? And so we see organizations maybe looking at things like advisory groups for their social enterprises. So maybe running that specific business, that industry that you're entering is different. And this totally depends on what route you want to go and how you want to structure yourself with your board. But sometimes having an advisory group where you have that industry specific knowledge, you have those friendly wise skeptics, works for organizations. The other thing is, what is the commitment that is needed from these organizations? So does your existing board have the skills, but also do they have the time is another thing to think through as you go and look at this. And so maybe an advisory group is someone who's committed to this certain piece and this industry that we're entering or that we're in, but we want to find different players or find different people. And so those are all things to consider, but like there's different ways you can structure them. And it's really understanding what your goals are, where you're headed, and then determining the best format that makes sense for you to get that support that you ultimately want, whether it's an advisory group, whether it's friendly wise skeptics, just one-off people coming in, or whether it's maybe looking at people on your board to say, do we have the right people here for the direction that we're headed?
To build on Brittni's point, a board can be a fairly involved long-term relationship, right? So an advisory committee enables you fairly quickly to experiment and see whether you're getting the right fit, and then maybe they could or could not transition to the board. But to build on both Jane and Brittni's point, making sure your board is on board with this process and engaged, and that it all kind of makes sense, and they're actually looking for input from an advisory committee that are gaps in knowledge that they have. As long as everybody is on the same page and understanding why you're doing this process, that hopefully should address a lot of the kind of dangers in this process.
I was just going to add my little 2 cents, which I think, Dan, you pretty much covered. When I was listening to Jane talk, I was thinking about or wondering, there's a difference, I guess, between understanding of social enterprise and buy-in from your board, and then expertise to help support the social enterprise. At the very minimum, I would say if you don't have understanding and buy-in from your board around social enterprise, like that's going to be a big barrier, because there is nuance where you could get a board that thinks, yes, make money and all of that supports the charitable purposes, and aren't interested in reinvesting any of that money back into the business side. That can create a big barrier. So at the very minimum, there's kind of that first step of your main board should have buy-in and understanding of. If they understand they don't have the expertise, and then a subcommittee or an advisory board or some other component gets passed along for some of that work, that may be a route your board decides to go, but they should have enough understanding of social enterprise and buy-in to go that route, to be able to make that decision kind of internally.
Thank you all.
Thank you for asking the question, Ronnie. Okay, back to the audience. Some of you that are in the audience submitted questions, so I'd like to call on one of you to please elaborate on your question by turning on your camera and unmuting yourself, please.
I can go if you're
Yes,
putting
please.
it out there. Okay. Hello everyone. Thanks for having me. My question is I guess it's kind of it's a big question, but have you ever seen social enterprise integrated into an organization such as a religious organization? And where would one even start in order to think of how that could work? I'm not sure if I'm asking too much, or yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
Who wants to go? You know I hate dead air. All right.
Jane, you can go.
The first answer is yes. Maybe help us a little bit by what you think this is going to look like. Do you have a notion of what kind of thing you're thinking is going to happen?
Yeah, so I'm just stepping into a board position on a religious organization, and they're contemplating different avenues in order to explore social enterprise, social aspects, and how. And it's at the beginning stage. So I'm just kind of wondering, trying to wrap my head around, is this been done?
Okay.
What does it look like?
So here's something to think about to start. If the definition of social enterprise, and there are as many definitions of social enterprise, I think, as there are people doing it. And people, I think, get really tied up in definitions and stuff. So Dan, forgive me, I'm going to start with that opener. I would suggest that a religious organization is an organization that wants to do good in community. So the change is to using if they take on social enterprise precepts, they are using marketplace forces or activities, sales of goods and services into the marketplace as to further their operation. So a church can have something as simple as space that they rent out to a daycare, and they're earning revenue doing that. So that could be seen as they take their assets and they're using them in a certain way to generate revenue. That makes them a social enterprise. Some of them go further in setting up businesses themselves. They may run the daycare center. So they're taking that further step. Organizations that are starting to think about this, that haven't really thought of themselves as a business before, I find have the better success if what they do has some relationship, whatever that is, to what they already know and do. So it might be the caring role they have in community, the relationships they have. So some churches you see go into food security questions, some go into childcare, some go into elder care, because it's kind of the next step from what their role is in community as a religious institution. So to me, that would be the steps I would think and see, and could see it making sense. I would say if the religious organization wants to do that, I would say look around the room and see what you know and do now. And is there a logical way you can take that to the next level? So.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that.
And I'll also just bring it back to, once again, friendly wise skeptics and industry advice is, are there other institutions that are maybe doing something similar to what you would like to be doing in that format? I think is really key. I think Calgary, we've got a really cool one at Knox United Church has a coffee shop. Or in Toronto, there's this really cool one called St. John's Bakery, where they create bread and they actually hire individuals who have employment barriers in the community. So there's really cool examples out there. And generally people are willing to share that expertise and talk about it. And as Jane was alluding to, space comes into the piece. There's some daycare, there's some elder care, there's lots of cool ways they've done that. As we said, we don't give legal advice, but there's also some implications legally. So just, of course, making sure you're on side with CRA and understanding that, but that industry experience and advice will help you also understand that. So,
and also once further from the industry advice is whatever the religious institution is may have a hierarchy, and they may be involved. For example, United Church of Canada has an entire unit that's focused on helping churches develop their social entrepreneurship skills. So whatever the organization is, there may be legal implications of what they allow or don't allow. And on the other side, they may have ways of helping. So talk to whoever the hierarchy is, that there might be some help there.
Wonderful.
And what the Trico Foundation was finding is a lot of people would create social enterprises, and some of them were just fundamentally designed so that you'd always have to seek grant revenue to kind of bolster the financial sustainability of it. So at the Trico Foundation, we've now created this tool called the Blender, as well as the 4 ways of social impact that can help you kind of diagnose what you want to do, as well as giving you some other examples of, like, there's so many possibilities of what you could set up. And Brittni's absolutely right. They should ultimately be grounded in the why, but having a tool available to you that kind of explains all the possibilities of social entrepreneurship, and then you taking it and looking at your why and seeing what the fit is, could be very powerful. So I'd encourage you to check out that tool at the Trico Foundation website.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
We'll look forward to hearing how it worked out.
Yeah, totally. Come back and tell us, please. Anyone else for a question? Otherwise, I'm going to call on you. Can I do that? Bantu, would you be comfortable if I did that to you? You submitted a question, but I thought you might want to elaborate and speak to it.
For sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sorry, just I'm in the middle of construction, so I won't turn my camera on. But I don't know. I don't know if I can fully remember my question, but I think it was around consulting and social entrepreneurship. So how, if say if you're like, starting up a consulting firm, like how you would I guess set it up so that way it is it does have that concept of a social thank you, Alia. So is a consulting business capable to become a social enterprise? And if so, how you would be able to structure it so that it could be, because I just think it could potentially take on different formats and such, but have you had experiences in maybe consulting firms becoming social enterprises? Was my question. Thank you.
And I think you're ready to answer.
The way the Trico Foundation defines social entrepreneurship is using business models to solve a social problem. So certainly we feel consultancy fits in that. If you have the intentionality of using your consultancy to solve a social problem, you would fit. But for us at Trico, we're trying to move people from, yes, the definition is important, but the even bigger conversation is looking at why you want to be called social enterprise. So do you want to be called social enterprise so that you can qualify for a government program, or your stakeholders is an important concept, or for your marketing? Really look at the intentionality of why you want to be a social enterprise and how far you could go with that concept is really, really important. Perhaps even bigger than just the notion of definition, because as Jane says, you could find probably 100 definitions, I'm sure some of which you would fit in and some of which you wouldn't.
doesn't it come down to the why, as you say, Dan? I mean, it's really about why are you doing this? If you want your business to change something in the economy, change something in community or in the world, and that's maybe not even who or what you consult on, it's how you treat other people that you work with, how you treat your employees, how you source things, how you are in the environment. It's about all of those kinds of things. So it's way more about the why. Yes, it can be something that helps you market, but it's more to me about the whole taking the economy back to the point where your stakeholders were what your primary interests were, not just your shareholders. It's the community you're in, how you're in community, and what your intention is. So it really comes down to intent. So if you decide I'm going to set up a consulting company that's entrepreneurial and is also social, then there you go. We have done loans to consulting companies that were very focused on stakeholders and being social entrepreneurs and how they operated. And so, yeah, you can absolutely do that. I think any business can be a social enterprise if they are taking on that larger definition of why. So.
Awesome, thank you.
And just to build off of both Dan and Jane, Dan had previously mentioned one of the tools that Trico has called the 4 Ways of Social Impact. But that is an interesting tool in terms of looking at what is your why, but then also what are different ways in which your organization is having or could be having impact. So Jane mentioned things like operations, things like what you do with your profits, things like your influence. So that tool may be useful to you as well. I know Alia just sent out the link to sort of the main page, but that guy's mentioned on that page.
Perfect, thank you.
On to any follow-up questions?
No follow-up question. I just maybe to the comment of like the blender. I actually did take that course with like Rosalind for the entrepreneurship. Now I can't even remember what the course was, but I think it was social innovation course that Rosalind teaches. So yeah, it's very beneficial for sure. So I've used that before, and we'll definitely tap into that again as well. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so the course that Bantu was talking about was it's a block week course that's hosted for the BCom students at Haskayne. So block week is a 1-week intensive course at Haskayne in the fall semester, and then for the MBA students in the winter semester. Alrighty, so back to the audience. Questions, please. Ruby, you're next. Thank you.
The 2 questions that I submitted have actually been answered, but I have a couple more. So the ones around legal structure, Jane answered, thank you very much. And the other one is slipping my mind. But the question that I was thinking of as we're going down this road, we've got the why, we're working on a business plan, but something I would be really interested to know from the 5 of you is what would be your top 3 things you would recommend that an organization kind of have locked down before they launch? Is it board structure, business model? What are the key things? Maybe there's 1, maybe there's 5, but I welcome your thoughts on that. What are the kind of top key things you need to have in place before you launch?
Christine, you should go first because we missed you last time around.
I'm thoroughly enjoying listening. Sorry, I totally just blanked. I had a thought in my head. Sorry, can you repeat just the last sentence you said there?
Sure. I just welcome your thoughts on what are 2 or 3 key things that every organization should have in place before they launch their social entrepreneurial.
Yeah, my mind had gone down the legal structures question again, and so I had heard that, and then 2 or 3 things. I feel like Jane's going to say more than 2 or 3 things. I think I asked her that question recently, actually. I think, I'm trying to not get too high level on this. I think being really mindful of your assumptions, which we talked about earlier, going in and being open. I'm going to steal Dan's quote of Jane's quote about being open to your baby being ugly. And just the idea of really not going in with a really narrow view of what you think this needs to look like or what your expectations around social enterprise are. We've talked a lot about the definition of social enterprise being very broad, and so it can be easy to want to narrow it into something really specific and then make your model fit that. And I think that would be something I'd really caution people against. Defining your customer would be another big one that I would think a lot about, and what your revenue model is. Understand that kind of basic understanding of accounting and financial statements. And if you don't have that, having an accountant and that legal structure piece, that's a little bit further down the road maybe, but understanding of financial and the financial piece coming into it would be important. And then I guess I would say, I think we'll all probably have some different answers. I would say maybe a level of feasibility early on and viability of the business model, and not getting too far down that road without understanding if it is a viable product or service or whatever you're offering.
Yeah, I think mine are probably in line. So there's a lot to kind of do. So one would be, and I think Christine touched on this, is your why. So where are you headed? Because if you don't really know what your goals are and where you're headed, both financially and socially, how do you know you're going in the right direction and headed the way that you want to go? And then the piece that we talked about earlier is, even with your board, is do you have this shared understanding of where you want to go so that it doesn't cause pressure points down the line? The next one is pressure points. So one of the things we talked about, the Blender Canvas, is really understanding how your model, how the social and the entrepreneurial aspects of your model actually interact together and potentially lead to momentum or to pressure points. And if your model has pressure points in it, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. It just means let's be aware of it sooner rather than later, so that we can figure out when we experience those pressure points, we're prepared for them, and it's not a huge shock. And the last one, I think, is really thinking through, well, how are you going to learn on this journey, or what do you need to learn on this journey? And so Christine touched on assumptions, but how are you going to have sort of those check stops along the way to really understand that we are moving towards our goal, and that we're moving forward as effectively, but also safely when you have a greater organization? How are you moving to get forward in sort of an affordable loss zone? How are you moving that forward as safely and effectively as possible? Would be like my 3 kind of, they're all big ones, and there's different ways to go about them.
I just want to add to that one point you said really quick, Brittni, too, and you've talked about this before. I would also, my 3B would be support, whether that's mentorship, whether that's peer support, whether that's, but having that in place early on is critical, so that you can get through some of those tougher moments.
So my answer would reflect what the other ladies have said. When it comes down to it, there's 3 main pillars for me when I'm doing risk assessment of a loan proposal that comes to us. First one's always mission. What's the point of this? What's the why? Is this in fact a fully fledged, fully encompassed social entrepreneurship? There's lots of things that skirt up to the edge of it, but don't pass that. We've got a fairly high threshold rate for that. So if they get past that level, then it comes down to two main things, really. The one is the customer and the understanding of market and revenue stream. Do you know who wants your product and why? Do you know who wants your service and why? And are they willing to pay for it? Are they able to pay for it? If that's not there, there's no there. And the third one is the management strength to be able to actually carry it out. And that's a many layered question. So is the corporate structure right? Are the resources right around that? Are the people right? Are they in the right relationships? So those are sort of three main pillars. There are many, many, many layers, as Brittni and Colleen both alluded to, and so it's a thing that you need to look at a number of things, but it's those three keys that actually work. And Christine, I called you Colleen. I don't know why. You're a redhead girl. I guess that's it.
Yeah, we're all the same. It's okay.
Yeah, you can call me Fred from now on.
So my answer is going to be slightly different from the others. So Steve Blank said a startup is in search of a business model until the money runs out. So the trick you're going to have is you want to get to the point that Jane just described, but you want to do it as quickly and safely as possible. So one is advice, and there's nothing like the challenge of knowing what you don't know. And the only way to get that is the friendly, wise skeptics that Brittni has talked about. Friendly, they care about you. Wise, they're smart in the way that you need them to be, so the industry specific knowledge. And skeptic in that they care enough to actually talk truth to you in terms of challenges. And we're amazed all the time at how few social entrepreneurs actually focus on getting advice outside of their current team. So, and it's easy to say, but hard to do in terms of getting the right people, giving you the right advice. So I big time focus on that, and it's really, really challenging. The second one is there's an amazing woman who writes about entrepreneurship called Sarasvathy. And she talks about affordable loss, which Brittni referred to, but I'll just very quickly kind of dig deeper into it. She made the great note that a lot of entrepreneurs focus on what they can gain by an idea. She found the entrepreneurs that were really successful focus on what they're willing to lose. And that's affordable loss, is making sure that you're doing stuff that it's not creating exposure to you that's more than you feel that your organization can afford. And it's actually a surprisingly powerful concept, especially where you're trying to buy the time to figure out a model that will work, so that you then have the key points that Jane is going to want to review. And the third thing, Brittni is absolutely right. In Trico Foundation, we're huge believers in learning. Like, think about it. Right team, big money, great idea. If you have those things, but I learn faster than you, I'm going to win. Like, learning is all powerful. So look at processes where you can learn as quickly and safely as possible. Remember, we talked before about shortening your feedback loop. So we find a lot of social entrepreneurs make the mistake of, oh, you know, we're going to do something and we're going to test it for 6 months or like a year. By the time you figure out something's wrong, you spent like 6 months to a year, your resources could be gone, stuff like that. I always see when you're trying to learn and explore those assumptions that Christine talked about, sometimes referred to as calling, see if you can get that information faster. Because again, learning is all powerful. So always be open to learning the key intel that you need as quickly and as cheaply as possible. And if you master those three things, and again, they're easy to say, hard to do. By the way, shameless plug, the Trico Foundation materials do provide you additional tools how to do that. The rest should take care of itself.
Thank you so much, Ruby. And Dan, we are a learning institution, so we love learning, but I love this idea of learning quickly so that you can implement quickly.
Yes, and I referred to Sarasvathy.
I think you're going to need to type it out and spell it.
Yeah.
I refuse to, because that's beyond me. That's why I was just pronouncing it, not typing it. But we'll find it and we'll get the information to you.
For sure. Do you know the book title? I can at least then search it. Or kind of.
The concept that she's led with Don't tell anybody. Paris is absolutely brilliant in her concepts, but her labeling of stuff is just. So she's a leader in something called effectual entrepreneurship. Search Saris, effectual entrepreneurship. I'm sure you'll get it. Please do not ask me to explain what she means by effectual entrepreneurship.
We'll look it up and then we'll add it to our reading list. Thank you.
Opposite from ineffectual entrepreneurship.
Well, if it was, it would be simple, but no, it's not. There's more to it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ruby, for such a great question. All right, back to the audience. What do we have question-wise or any follow-ups?
Yeah, comments would be interesting too. What other people think of some of the conversation. Tim's kind of wanting to.
Tim, sure, come off mute.
Jane, you can read my mind. I was just going to say to those.
You're squirming.
Definitely, from my experience, customer. The more you can understand your customer's pain is the biggest thing that's going to make a difference. You fall in love with their pain and suffering, and almost to an obsessive level, and that's going to lead you the right way. All the other forms and structures, there's a wealth of resources that are just eager to help people that have figured out what someone's pain and suffering actually is and what the next steps are in solving it.
And then if they're not willing to pay for it or pay what it costs to do it, they might be willing to pay something, but not what it really costs to do it. That's when you have to walk from the idea, unless you can figure out another way to make it work.
Yeah, I would just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan. You're probably saying the same thing I'm going to say, so go ahead.
We'll see. Do you know, like, the two things that kill social enterprises, or actually any entrepreneurial venture, typically, is customer not wanting the product or success?
Yeah, success is a killer. Success and fast growth are really frightening. And if they can't work properly, if you can't find a way to live through that, yeah, you go right off the cliff.
Yeah, success in terms of like premature scaling and expansion, really, really tricky.
Yeah.
Again, it blows our mind that the two things are just the fundamental: customer doesn't want the product, and so many social enterprises actually dying because they had a little bit of success and expanded too fast.
Yeah.
Mine was slightly different. So I was just going to add, we talked about the Blender canvas, but two of the pieces in the Blender canvas are looking at, one, why is your customer there? What is the customer need that you're filling? So is it sort of a purchase for social good? And Jane talked about this last time we met, but customers are still making their decisions based on price and quality, and things like being green and social will push you over the edge. But if it's a crappy cup of coffee, it's a crappy cup of coffee, and they may not come back a second time. And so really understanding why your customer's there, what sort of the competition is, and how traditional business is maybe filling their need for them. And then on the other end is, within your model, are there expenses because of your social aspects that traditional business doesn't have? So that could lead to pressure points that your competitors don't have. And so can you pass on those additional costs to the customer? Are they willing to pay for that? And then at this place of, can you actually charge more maybe because of the social aspect within that? So the Blender canvas covers that all. If you're interested, the link's been sent out, but it'll go into a number of those aspects as well, in terms of really looking at, well, what customer need are you filling? Why are they there? Can they pay for it?
And not to make you all overly paranoid, but another tricky aspect is sometimes customers can be wrong. In fact, we've heard of a lot of startups who initially canvass what customers want, and the poor startup gets pulled in very different directions because, you know, there's one customer that wants this flavor and this customer wants this flavor. So having that kind of deliberation as to what the market size is and what you're really trying to accomplish, and being true to what you want, even though there's some customers saying, oh, you know what, if you just added this bell and whistle, you'd be better off. And again, that's why friendly wise skeptics who've kind of been there, done that, are so crucial.
The ones that frighten me are the customers who say, yeah, we'll buy that, we'll do that, and then don't. So taking measured steps to get there and actually testing somehow whether or not they actually will, rather than just saying, yeah, we think that's a great idea, and then them slinking away and not actually. Back in the, this is a political metaphor, but it's the Flora factor. I don't know that any of you remember Flora MacDonald, who ran in the Conservative leadership in 1974 against Joe Clark. A lot of people, she was the first woman doing this. A lot of people wore Flora MacDonald for leader buttons into the polling booth. Way more buttons went in than votes came out. So, you know, they said they were behind her and then they didn't vote for it. So the slang for that became the Flora factor. And customers can do that. And it's really scary. So.
Yeah, and I would just build off of to what Dan said, is like, not every customer is going to be the right customer at that time, right? So it doesn't mean that you're not going to serve them tomorrow, probably not tomorrow, but years down the line or as your business grows. But really understanding, I think it ultimately comes down to that, what is your why and what are you hoping, and really understanding what your goals are, because it's a journey, right? It's a journey. And so maybe someone's not the right customer today. Maybe they're leading you off onto something completely different. It's not something that you're seeing in the research that you've done or the work that you've done, but that doesn't mean that you can never serve them and that it's not going to evolve in that direction one day. It's just really understanding, here's what our goals are right now. Here's what our why is right now. And this is what makes sense. And we use the language of owning your journey, right? Ultimately, how do I own my journey and understand that path and move forward as safely and as effectively as possible?
Just to build on Jane's point, and I told the story last AMAASE, so I have to make sure I'm not getting into a rut here, but there was a social entrepreneur who had an idea, and prior to actually launching, went to various potential customers and said, you know, if I started this social enterprise, would you buy my services? And the majority of them said yes. So he dutifully created his social enterprise, you know, hired the people and things like that, went back to the businesses because his customers going to be businesses, and none of them would agree to hire his product. And so what happens with social entrepreneurship is, because you're doing social good, people are not going to want to say no to you. So he learned the hard way, and it almost killed his business. So he quickly scrambled and found other customers. So always be very kind of, I don't want to make you paranoid, but be cautious. And what he probably should have done is, rather than just people verbally saying, yes, I'll buy your services, is see if they'd enter into some type of contract. So be very careful. People, if you do consult customers, and others are going to have a built-in incentive, especially in Canada, to not be mean to you and actually say yes when they may actually not mean to do that.
Yeah, be careful adding the social part to the marketing. See whether somebody wants the product first. The social part of that marketing might just be the nice cherry on the cake.
I have a question. My name is Bukola. What are the practical ways to check if people want your product? Is it because, like you said, they might not tell the truth in market surveys, or they might not even fill it out? And also depending on culture, like I'm Nigerian, sometimes they don't even feel those kind of things. And if I talk to my friends, they will all say, oh yeah, Bukola, go for it, we'll support you. So how do I practically do that in a right way? And then when I get the answers back, how can I interpret what the feedback is and how to make sense of it? Because they might want it now, but maybe they won't want it 2 years down the road. Thank you.
You're welcome. So this is going to be general. And one of the things I would say to keep in mind is that the research approach might be different depending what your product is and who you're looking for. So some of it, if I was having this conversation, you know, across the desk in the office, I'd be saying, well, let's talk about what you think the product is and really going into that. And then figuring out, okay, how do we find out how this fits in the marketplace? Are there other products like it? Are there other products sort of like it or services sort of like it? What is their marketplace? Starting there and trying to figure out where your idea fits in the larger scheme of things. I think this is where, I think, Dan, you were the one that talked about it, and Brittni as well, about getting help, finding professionals who actually know how to analyze customer and how to do that kind of research. If you can't afford a lot of money to pay for people, like most of us can't, you might be able to partner, for example, with universities. Various universities have projects where business students actually are involved in taking on some of these kinds of challenges. And maybe I should leave it to the Haskane people to talk about that, because that might be a great way for you to get someone to help you design a way to get the information, to research statistics and stuff that's available, and also then to analyze what you're finding out.
Thank you.
Thanks for the plug there, Jane. Yeah, so we have in the MBA program, we have a capstone class where the students will work with a community partner to look at a strategic initiative within the organization or something at a more holistic level to basically put the tools that they've learned during their MBA together. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, I'll put my email in the chat and then we can talk about that. The other option is for a paid internship for a student to be part of an organization for 4 months. And the organization pays, I think, $5,000 or no, yeah, $5,000, and my tax will match that $5,000 for an undergraduate student. And so the student will get $10,000 to work for an organization. So that's the My Tax program. So happy to share that information in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
I've also seen lists of various techniques you can use to get pre-commitments from customers. I think if you just Google pre-customer commitment, but two that spring to mind are, one is contracts and the other is prepayment, and prepayment is probably like the best. But the second way to approach that, in addition to like the customer analysis that Jane talked about and pre-customer commitment, is again staying within that affordable loss zone. So if you're not sure about customers, try to limit your exposure. So if you think you have, like Brittni has a process through Assess where we say, you know, rather than renting a truck, rent a van. Rather than renting a van, rent a car. Rather than renting a car, rent a bike, and things like that. So again, it's trying to limit your exposure before you kind of prove whatever size of customers you have. And then once you've proved that you can rely on them, that's when you take the next step in whatever the financial risk for you would be.
Yeah.
So for example, if you had, let's say you were selling cookies, random example, but there it is. If you had like 10 people who said, you know what, you should start a cookie business and things like that, rather than kind of renting a factory, is just bake the cookies in your house and see if you can actually, how many you can sell to these 10 people and things like that.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, if I go out and ask my friends, they'll just all say yes, right? Like they'll just all, because they want to help you. And the other thing is we hang out with people who are similar to us. So what my pain point is, my friends might be having the same pain point. And so that piece around friendly wise skeptics, the piece around industry experience becomes really important in terms of, well, as I expand outside of my friends and family, like if you sold those cookies Dan just talked about, but you sold them all to your mom, you're probably not getting the feedback that you're looking for. And so thinking about, well, what do I need to learn? What do I need to test? And customers can be a big piece of that. Like, who actually is interested in these cookies, right? That becomes really important, because if you're going to run a test or you're going to try something out, try to learn what you need to learn from it, and try to, one, stay in that affordable loss zone, but two, also make sure the feedback that you're getting is the feedback that you need. So if your mom's buying the cookies, that is so lovely of her, but you probably aren't going to structure a whole customer group around your mom, unless your target is moms and they all are into it, right? But there's pieces to that of really understanding, like, how do I structure a test where I'm going to actually learn what I need to learn, and that can be around customers as well.
The most depressing thing I ever had happen was a man showed up at my desk. This is before SEF, but showed up at my desk, and he'd printed 10,000 copies of his children's book, and he'd sold 995. And he wanted to know, this was a year later, he wanted to know, how in the world am I going to sell the rest of them? He had not figured out his affordable loss, and he'd not figured out. So if he printed 1,000 and had sold 995, he would have been in great shape. He would have almost had a sellout, but instead he printed way too many. So it's really that balancing act of figuring out how many cookies is really important to figure out. And that the affordable loss, I'd never heard that term before, Dan. Thanks. That's a really useful concept.
Interesting. I have another question. So I had been talking to, while I sought help, I was talking to somebody, because I run a non-profit organization. It's not charitable, that it's possible. So to sustain that non-profit, I thought to start a social enterprise that makes profit, and then puts money back into the non-profit. So almost like what Wins is doing, the women, I forgot what their name is, that does the thrift store. So if you want to do that and you want to use that nonprofit to trial that business, is that a good start, or that is illegal?
Can I ask a question? Does your nonprofit organization that you're running now have anything to do with a thrift store? Is there any connection with it?
About to, yeah, soon.
But
I talked to them, and we are going to meet. So
has it got, with what you're doing now, has it got to do anything to do with running a thrift store?
No.
Let me give you an example. So we had a client whose main operation is helping young unwed mothers, parents, young parents, teenage parents raise children, have children and raise children. They wanted to start a social enterprise. They said that the problem they came to us with is they were going to run a social enterprise that was going to make them more profit to actually help earn revenue into the nonprofit, which is helping children. They actually went through a long business plan process and were in the final stages of choosing which coffee franchise they were going to buy as their social enterprise. They knew nothing about running a coffee shop, right? It had nothing to do with their nonprofit organization, but they were going to start this social enterprise. And I went to the final presentation by the consultant to the board, and I never saw such a defeated looking bunch of people in my life around that table who were determined to do the right thing. They were going to start this business so they could earn more money to support their real mission. And I finally had to pipe up and say, you don't have to do this. It's taking you off what your real job is, what your real mission is. What can we talk about what you guys know already around the table? What skill set do you have? Could you teach a babysitting accrediting course? Because like you're the guys who know this stuff. What do you already know internally that you can actually expand as a service beyond what you do now and make money at it? Because you know that thing better than anybody else. And so when you say the thrift store, that's why I'm asking, does it really have anything to do with your central mission and services now? Is it something about which you know, or is it a whole new business you have to learn? If it's a whole new business, I'd be cautious. I'd be very skeptical. I'd get a lot of help. I'd put it through a lot of things before I decided to do that. Because personally, I've not seen many of those kinds of things that really work. The ones that work is where it's taking a piece of what you already know and not knowing much about your organization. That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you take what you're already good at and push it to the next level to earn some extra revenue?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was not planning to do a thrift, so I was just using them as an example.
Okay.
I have my own business idea.
Right. Okay. So that's the one.
I'll just kind of add.
I'll shut up.
I was just going to add to some of what Jane said, because it reminds me of when I hear people, a group, a nonprofit, or whatever the case may be, and they're like, well, I want to start a social enterprise. And it comes back to that, what's your why? And if your why is I want to start a social enterprise, that can be a really scary place to start, because it isn't necessarily using the skill sets you have and what you know. And so to Jane's point about, whereas if it's, oh, we have this skill set, how can we, and there's this need, and how can we maybe pivot that to be a social enterprise or to be social entrepreneurial in its work? That's very different than, and I admittedly way back was like, we're going to start a social enterprise, because I was working for a not-for-profit, and this was and it was a really horrible business idea, because we didn't care about the product, we didn't care about the end result, we wanted a business and we wanted it to be a social enterprise, and it was a flop wholeheartedly, because that's where we started with. And I've learned over the years to start with, what skill sets do I have available to me, and how can I utilize those into a meaningful business model that's also going to provide social good? And there's a big difference between that motivation. So it would that just kind of my 2 cents on that.
Mm.
Yeah, I'll just I think that what Jane and Christine has been fantastic. I will just raise the red flag that I think potentially your question gets into legal implications.
Yeah.
I think that there are, we are not lawyers, and I know as Trico, we don't give legal advice, and it's because there's people out there that do that. And there's people that are good at that. And so potentially your structure as a nonprofit might have different legal implications than, I believe, Women in Need Society as a registered charity and have the allowance to run things like related businesses. So those are things that you're gonna need to explore, figure out what your questions are, figure out what your goal is, and then determine what your needs are legally, also accounting wise. So that's what I would just flag for you, is that there's CRA and there's legal implications that I think you were probably broaching with your question.
And just to build on Brittany's point, if your goal in this is to, as a not-for-profit, intentionally make a profit on a regular basis, you definitely should seek legal opinion on that, because that is a very tricky thing when it comes to not-for-profits.
Okay.
More importantly, a tax lawyer.
Yeah, and with Dan's, I would just flag, so every charity is a not-for-profit, but not every not-for-profit is a charity. So
That's right.
Charitable status has different implications for revenue generation than being a nonprofit without charitable status. So that's what sort of Dan's touching on.
If you're a not-for-profit without charitable status, you can make a profit. It's about what you do with it, right?
Yes.
You can't pay it out to shareholders. So you have to put it back into the business. It has to stay inside the nonprofit business. Charitable status is a whole different thing. It's on top of your not-for-profit structure. And it's CRA giving you, I call it a magic wand, so that you can bestow taxable benefits onto other people who give you donations. So if you're a not-for-profit, You can make a profit. It's how you deal with it internally. Now,
See, I'm not
today-
so sure about that. So that's where it's important to speak to
okay,
the tax lawyer.
making a profit is more money coming in than going out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can be profitable. You can have more money coming in than going out as a nonprofit. It's about what your objectives are, and it's about how you treat that money. If you don't have charitable status, it kind of is it's nobody's going to come and talk to you about the amount of profit you make as a not-for-profit. You just can't pay it out. You have to leave it inside the organization for its purposes.
So not an expert here, but
Yeah.
to my very feeble understanding, hint is in the name, not for profit. So my understanding is if there's an intentionality to habitually earn a profit, you could get in trouble with that for not-for-profits. But again, not an expert, would double check. I mean, you can see we've got two people just on this panel that have slightly different views. So yes, speak to some type of lawyer, ideally a tax lawyer.
And this is another place where it's so great to have that industry specific knowledge, right? Someone who has that and can specifically look into what your structure is and what you're trying to do with that, because that is also going to play a role, is like your specific circumstances are going to play a role.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Let us know how things go. Let us know what enterprise you start up. We'd be curious to see how else we can support you down the line.
Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. So from the floor, anyone from the audience?
Now's your chance. Either that we all go to cocktail hour early.
I've got another question.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you have any experience with how you kind of quantify, or have you seen any really good models of social enterprises that quantify their carbon impact in terms of like some kind of carbon credits? And talking about some of the more, because I see this, there's this huge momentum towards ESG frameworks, and carbon credits is kind of a huge, it's an incredible investment opportunity from a lot of companies. And I feel like that's a space that social enterprises could really shine in. I'm curious if you've seen any experience or stories around that.
I haven't dug too deeply into it, but 10 trees, which is premised on the buy a t-shirt, they do plant 10 trees that has this impact on carbon reductions. I had heard that they're doing quite great work in tracking that, as well as actually having an app that helps the people who buy the shirts know that. So that's one that jumps out to me that I'm familiar with.
Part of the challenge right now is, and stuff that when you start reading this, is what ESG measurements are acceptable. People will say, oh yeah, we track ESG. Well, what does that mean really? And often it's more and more of the larger mainstream investment managers, for example, are seeking out ESG product, as they call it. And the other one is equity and diversity seeking investments as well.
Yeah.
And you're touching on what's a really, I think, something we've got to sort out is how is this stuff measured, and what's acceptable measure of something real, what's not just a form of greenwashing or whatever. Yeah, my answer to you about have I seen anything? No, not that I would trust, because when I start poking at, okay, how is that actually measured? There's a big blank space in the middle where the miracle takes place, and we're expected to accept that they are what they say they are. And I don't know how, I don't know how we're going to come to grips with that. Measuring impact and reporting on it is a really critical problem that finally the people in this sector are starting to understand is a challenge we got to come to grips with. But so far, I've mostly seen people saying, yeah, we got to do something. And not a lot of really credible, but I'm sure there's some smart people out there somewhere who will come up with it. At least I hope so. I mean, our challenge with measuring the impact of our portfolio is that we deal with so many sectors. Like when you see the UN Sustainable Development Goals, people say, which of the UN SDGs are you addressing? Well, all of them except oceans. We got no oceans in Alberta, so I haven't got anything for oceans, unless you let me count the river stuff, and then maybe. So it's really a challenge for to come up with it, and it's a puzzle. And I worry that a lot of investment funds will start saying, yeah, we're put your money with us because we're the ones that are really getting the environmental impact. Well, let's talk about how you're actually tracking that. And do we believe, so sorry to be cynical somewhat about it, but it's 10 years ago when I arrived, I thought, yeah, I'm going to find out how to do this right. And I've been searching ever since.
We should have a future conversation about that.
Yeah. Dan, you're able to read more stuff than I am. Have you found anything that's really encouraging?
Well, if you want to talk ESG and sustainable investing in these challenges, Tariq Fancy, who is the former CEO of Impact Investing of Blackrock, no less, is going to be speaking at our very own Pivot on Purpose in November 17 to 19, November 18
to 20.
God, I'd forgotten about that. And I didn't even set that up. Thanks, Tim, you got us to because that'll be
perfect. Thank you.
That'll be really interesting.
I was going to reference him. Thank you.
Yeah, so Tariq Fancy, ex-CIO of Blackrock, will be there, which we'll talk about this. So it's a perfectly timed question.
I don't know if you have it handy, Alia, you probably don't, but you had shared with us previously this really amazing article that he did that calls into question.
Yes.
So,
well, that's why I asked the question. So I'm looking forward to this.
It's an essay that was published on Medium, so I'll try to find the link while everyone else is speaking and then put it in the chat.
I have a question.
Yes. Go ahead.
Most people say it takes 2 years for an entrepreneur to start getting to your break-even point. So is that still true these days? Because I've never sold anything in the last 10 years. Is that still true these days? Do you expect that the first 2 years, you will be running it on loans and maybe a few grants, but you won't have anything actually coming?
I'm not quite sure 2 years was ever. That sounds like pretty profoundly ambitious, particularly for a social enterprise.
I'd love to know if there's any regular business world research on what typical is in that. I know from our experience that we found people were often wildly, overly optimistic about how fast they were going to break even. And that's usually a red flag for me now. Somebody says, oh yeah, we're going to pay you back in 3 years. It's like, yeah, sure you are. So yeah, it would be, I think it very much depends what type of business it is, what kind of track you are going on. I mean, how long has Uber been around and is it ever broken even? There seems to be a lot of, so there's differences depending what you're doing and how you're doing it. Go ahead.
Sorry, Coach. I think the other piece to play is that if you're looking at a social enterprise, you're likely going to have additional expenses or pressure points that traditional businesses don't have. And so really understanding how our model operates and what are our goals with that model. So in some cases, some social enterprises, it's really difficult to break even. So something like a training and employment social enterprise where you constantly have people coming through the doors for training, it can be difficult to hit that break even point. But there are examples of social enterprises that do this really well. and are able to achieve their financial goals. Ember Staffing Solutions is a really great example of an organization who's using kind of a tricky business model, but has been able to kind of figure out their place in the market. So I think the key ultimately is understanding what are our goals. Our goals to break even, our goals to turn a profit, but then understanding when it comes to that, also, what are the social points within our model that maybe are adding additional expenses or might cause pressure points, and understanding, can I pass these off to the customer? And if not, how am I going to fill those gaps? And so as a social enterprise, you're trying to balance those two worlds. And so what maybe is a traditional break-even point for a coffee shop might not be the same for a social enterprise coffee shop.
And then the economy can change and it can all go to hell, right? So there's other things that come into it as well.
Yeah, as to build on particularly Brittni's point, is just making sure, knowing what your journey is and what your goals are, and having that understanding with your stakeholders. If you're starting to have people that are judging you against the average, that might be a time to kind of look more deeply as to whether that's really the fit for you, because judging anything by average is usually not a productive way to go.
I have one quick dumb question. Is that all social enterprise have boards, like nonprofit, or it can be one person?
Yes, any corporate structure can be a social enterprise.
Okay.
In the province of Alberta at the moment, there are apparently 9 different ways to incorporate. Just thought I'd throw that crazy piece of info out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you everyone for all your questions. I have learned so much. So thanks for asking those questions so I could learn from you, and people who will watch this video will also have this opportunity to learn. Before I let everyone go, I'll just do a roundtable with our panelists to share what's coming up, what's on their plate these days, before we say goodbye for the evening. So Jane, let's start with you.
I'm just going to all the great things everybody else is running, so I'll pass.
Brittni?
I will just say our assess tools are out there. They're being tested. We're working with groups in terms of getting feedback on them. So if it's something you're interested in checking out, that's fantastic. And then I know Alia and Dan will talk about something else that's exciting coming up.
Shall I go to Christine and then we'll finish off with Dan?
Thanks, Alia. We just have our I'm not sure what the name of it is these days, Jan, our fall event coming November 22nd. So not really catered specifically to social enterprises, but certainly open to social entrepreneurs who are interested in the broader ecosystem of social enterprise and social finance, or representing organizations. So I just threw the Eventbrite link into the chat there for anyone wanting to come and check out kind of what's going on in the ecosystem.
Dan, final word.
So at Trico Foundation, we're a really big believer in learning from those who have actually been there, done that. So tomorrow we'll be announcing the 10 finalists for our What's Next YYC prizes, which are middle stage social entrepreneurs in Calgary. And they'll also be part of the Pivot on Purpose event that I previously mentioned that I assume Alia will talk more about. So if you add those up to the other social entrepreneurs that have actually been invited to speak at Pivot on Purpose, and by the way, it's not going to be a lecture format, they're all Q&A. So this is your grand chance to learn from these people with your questions. I think we have like 21 truly amazing and diverse social entrepreneurs from across the country at the advanced stage, middle stage, and then startup stage. So would strongly encourage you to attend Pivot on Purpose, which is virtual and free.
Yes, tell your friends about Pivot on Purpose, which we're lovingly calling POP. If you want to advertise it on your social media channels, sorry, we have a social media kit that we're happy to share with you. I've put the link in the chat. So in addition to the awards that are happening at Pivot on Purpose, we have some fantastic speakers that we've alluded to. Great, Tim, you'll pop by. We love that. There's also, sorry, lost my train of thought. First, I was going to say amazing speakers. Tariq Fancy, who we mentioned. There's also Alex Edmonds, who is the author of Grow the Pie. So looking at similar concepts and just from a higher level. And Ed Freeman, who talks about stakeholder theory and a professor at Virginia University. And then also a case competition for an Indigenous-based Canadian social enterprise that we're really excited about on November 20th. So happy to send out all those links. And then, yeah, did I miss anything, Dan, about POP?
No, just emphasizing that all the speakers that Alia talked about aren't focused on the theory of this, but the practical how-to. So we've really tried to be very diligent in focusing on those insights that you would need to actually execute on social entrepreneurship, not just like the theory stuff.
And I just wanted to add our next POP session, or sorry, our next AMAASE session will be part of POP.
Yes. So AMAASE at POP on the 19th at 3 p.m. instead of our usual 3:30 p.m. Look forward to seeing you all there. And tell your friends. I will be emailing you all the invitation. Yes, Jane, that's so true. Without your questions, this doesn't work. So thank you. I've added you all to our mailing list for this particular event. I will not spam you, just so that I can share more information. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.